has large windows on the ground floor, which is unusual for a fortified house. Howdy. You join me this video to have a little look through my book on castles. We're just going to have a flick through, maybe read some parts of it, just some soft reading, and maybe some tracing. So, hopefully this can help you to relax, maybe fall asleep. You might be interested in the facts, or you might just like to hear the whispering. That's okay. Whatever has drawn you here, I hope you can enjoy it. So let's take a look. Britain's castles, the best of. So I've had this book for quite some time. And while I have visited quite a few castles over the years, there's still many more to visit. But I do love a good old castle or any historical building. I really like the architecture and the history when you think of everything that's gone on. So there's some feature articles in this book, and he just said this is 100 of Britain's best castles, listed alphabetically. Now there is a map. Location map. And you can see they are dotted all around. I think that's an aeroplane in the background. So you can see there's some areas there's quite an abundance. Lots around the Welsh coast. Not so many up here around the Lake District, but quite a lot on this eastern coastline and the southern. So we're looking at a book about castles, but you may wonder what a castle is defined as, and it tells us just here in the introduction. A castle is defined as a properly fortified military residence. In medieval times, the castle was home not only to the owner and his family, but also to his retinue, his military operations and to protect him from enemies. This was a product of feudalism, whereby the lord of the castle agreed to protect his vassals and provide land, while his vassals worked the land and be called on for military duty. Now, British castles tend to be one of two types: the fortified enclosure and the fortified tower, or a combination of the two. You can see as castles grew, owners built extra towers and walls to accommodate all their worldly goods, livestock and vassals. This was the origin of great castle complexes like the Tower of London. In the 12th century, powerful gatehouses were built into the walls to provide an additional layer of protection. In some cases, the gatehouse was even further fortified with walls and ditches, forming what is known as a barbican. So this is Caerphilly Castle and Moat. It's the 13th century. And this is Dorbitan Castle. So you can see just the remnants here of the walls. It's pretty. You imagine that you can see, if that's the river, any approaching enemies. Okay, so there's a mixture in this book of castles where there's just the remains of the grounds and ones that are fully intact. But even the ones that have just the walls remaining, you can still get a good idea, if you use your imagination, how these might have looked way back when. So this is Acton Burnhall Castle in Shropshire. The ruins of a fine fortified manor, Acton Burnhall, was abandoned in 1420. Wow, that's so long ago, and yet it has still remained. So what does it tell us about this one? It's roofless, with only the walls still standing. It has large windows on the ground floor, which is unusual for a fortified house, because the windows would have been difficult to defend if the house had ever come under attack. In times of peace, however, they had the advantage of plenty of light into what would otherwise have been a rather gloomy set of ground floor rooms. You can see those large windows. Robert Bennell, after whom the house Ramble was an important man in the 13th century, serving both as Edward I's Chancellor of England and as Bishop of Bath and Wells. Okay, well that's so nice. This might be what you would be thinking if you heard the word castle and the truth bending that's widow sweeping down. So this one looks much more intact, and we can see it says that it's privately owned and the castle is not open to the public except for occasional special events. This is Addington Castle in Kent. So Kent is down on the bottom right of the map. The medieval castle at Addington on the banks of the Medway, just outside Maidstone, has had an eventful history that converted it from a 13th century fortress to a grand Tudor mansion, a farmhouse, a stately home, and finally a retreat for Carmelite friars. That's really pretty. This is a castle on my list to visit. And this looks very, very picturesque. You can see the towers and the ancient tree. You can imagine all the people over the hundreds of years that lived around here that would have sat just here and enjoyed the view of the river. So this is Alnwick Castle in Northumberland, which is on the east coast of the map. The clustered towers of this magnificent residential fortress have seen a good deal of action since the castle was founded in the 11th century. Its position made it vulnerable to attack from the Scots, and it played an important role in the War of the Roses during the 15th century. That's very pretty. That's a lovely shot. And the castle and the reflection in the trees. Very peaceful. This one might remind you of the Tower of London. It's similar, like a fairy tale. That's Arundel Castle. A little boats in the foreground. The trees. Now this is a very, very large castle. This is Bamburgh Castle in Northumberland, and it's very near to the Alnwick. And Bamburgh's location, standing proud on a rocky most spectacular of all the English castles. It is built on a cliff, and you can see that just there. 150 feet above the North Sea. Its landward sides are protected by a forbidden display of strong walls. Bamborough can be seen for miles, presenting a formidable obstacle to any would-be attackers. There have been fortifications on the site for thousands of years. That's wonderful. That's a nice fireplace. Chairs and the rugs. You can imagine a roaring fire. You just come out back from a day of exploring, and you return to a roaring fire, and you can hear your food crackling as it cooks. Wow, that's at Blair Castle. Readin Castle in North Ayrshire. Then it's very pretty. Let's skip a few pages. Oh, this is a feature on Carisbrooke Castle, which is in the Isle of Wight, which is an island just off the coast of southern England. That's very dramatic. I think these are in alphabetical order, so they're not in order of the nicest, because that's subjective. That looks like a fairy tale with the turrets, like something you would see in a film. This is Deal Castle. That's D-E-A-L in Kent. It houses a display of Iron Age weapons and relics of the town's history. Dover Castle in Kent. Dover Castle is so enormous and contains so many fascinating features was a state-of-art castle in medieval times, displaying some of the most advanced defensive architecture available. Its strategically vital position at the point where England is nearest to the coast of France has given it a unique place in British history, and it is without doubt a most powerful, massive and imposing, splendid builder. And it was used during World War II to plan the evacuation of Dunkirk. Dwart, I may pronounce that wrong. Castle, Argyll and Bute. Dwart Castle is perched at the end of a craggy point, with wonderful views across along the Sound of Mull. This fine castle is the ancient seat of the MacLean chiefs from the 14th century, but was originally built for the MacDougalls in the 13th century to guard the navigation route of the Sound of Mull. Dwart means dark headland. After the Jacobite rebellion in the 17th century, the family left the castle and it was taken over by government troops for several years before falling into ruin for over a century. But thankfully it was restored in 1911 by Sir Fitzroy MacLean. Okay, now that's an impressive castle. Wow. You can just make out the road or the path that leads up to this. This is Dunnottar Castle in Aberdeenshire. This is a fireplace. That's had many a tale over the years set in front of it. That's beautiful. On the rugged coastline of South Aberdeen, a great stack of rock projects into the stormy North Sea, topped by a jumbled collection of buildings spanning several centuries, joined to the land by a narrow crumbling neck of rock. Great cliffs protect this natural fortress on all sides, while a thick wall and a gatehouse protect the castle entrance. The first castle here was built in the 12th century, but virtually nothing remains of this early building. In the 14th century, an L plan, that's L plan tower house was built by William Keith, the Marshal of this is Leeds Castle, yeah. It's very pretty. And it's in Kent. It takes its name from its first owner, a man named Lead or Lydian, who built himself a wooden castle in 857. Lead was the chief minister of the King of Kent, and in a time where a fall from grace or an attack by rival parties was a way of life, Lead was very wise in building a stronghold for his family on the two small islands in the lake formed by the River Len. It is difficult to imagine what the original Leeds castle must have looked like, especially when confronted by the grandeur of the building that stands on the islands, or the two islands today. Edward I rebuilt the earlier Norman castle, providing it with a set of outer walls. You can see here a barbican and the glorious, or the curious, gloriette, a D-shaped tower on the smaller of the two islands. Now that's so pretty. Little archways and the windows. So this one is Lindisfarne Castle in Northumberland. It's a 16th century fort turned into a private home in 1903. And you can see it just there. Now this one is a bit different. Twice a day, the tide covers the ancient causeway that connects Holy Island, or Lindisfarne, to the mainland. Anyone who misjudges the tide must wait until the causeway opens up again in several hours, and it is not unknown for people and vehicles to be trapped by the rising tide while halfway across. Perhaps it was this daily encroachment by the sea that attracted the early Christians to the island. But Lindisfarne has a rich history that dates back to the saints of the 7th century. In the 11th century, the Benedictines founded a monastery here, the remains of which can still be visited. The castle, however, is comparatively modern and was built in the 16th century. It looks so peaceful. It's blue. This is a nice section on life in a stone walls and gaps in the shutters must have made them very cold and gloomy places, especially in the winter. Castles would have also been noisy, with the lord, his family, servants, soldiers, cooks, grooms, and a host of others crammed inside. Privacy was impossible, luxury, even for the lord himself. So you can see here the tapestries on the walls. So many castles have those. Many of the chambers would have had paintings or tapestries to decorate the walls. In most castles there would have been rushes on the floors, although some wealthy owners might have been able to afford rugs. The heart of the castle was the hall. Meals were eaten there, and some would have used the hall as sleeping quarters after the lord had retired to bed. Later, castles often had a solar above the hall, an airy, pleasant room, perhaps the forerunner of the drawing room, where the lord could relax away from the bustle of the hall. Wow. Now, I think the remnants of the moat. This is Restamore Castle in Cornwall, which is on the bottom left on the map. So it says Norman castles are often reduced to a few grassy humps amid towering nettles, but this is an exception, occupying a lofty mound defended by a deep moat high above the Furry Valley. The views from the top of the castle walls are magnificent, and the extensive dry-moated ruins are wonderfully atmospheric. The oldest and best preserved example of Norman motte and bailey construction in Cornwall. So these are 12th and 13th century remains, and it includes the gate, the keep, kitchens and private rooms, with the walls standing almost at their original height. This one's in Scotland, the Scottish. Tintagel Castle, sweeping up in the bluest of skies. So Tintagel is traditionally associated with the legend of King Arthur, who, it is said, was conceived here while Merlin waited in a cave under the castle. The cave that pierces the thin neck of rock which joins the peninsula to the mainland is still called Merlin's Cave, and it can be visited at low tide. So this is a castle you may all recognise, the Tower of London. William the Conqueror began work on the keep, known as the White Tower, in about 1078, but it was probably completed by William II some 20 years later. And building in the Tower of London complex has continued throughout history, right up to the Waterloo Barracks built in 1845. Now I think we're up to the W's. Oh yes, Warwick Castle. Now this is one of the largest Windsor Castle. 900 years old. That's incredible. Just see the little people. All those windows. Lots of windows. Imagine these are little eyes. They're close. Close more. Let's close all the curtains. And let them go to sleep. And it's time to go to sleep. And we are at the end of the book. And it's time to sleep. So thank you for watching. And listening. Maybe you have visited some of these castles, or maybe you have a favourite castle. I will see